I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me is Dr. Patrick Wyman. And before we begin today's proceedings, please stand for My Country 'Tis of Thee, as sung by the guy from House of Pain. Welcome to the show. Did you enjoy the Everlast tribute during UFC 216, Pat?
No. Why would I have? Why would I have enjoyed that?
I was like, this is peak fucking America right here. This is the worst. Like, what a gaudy way to memorialize a terrible tragedy. So that's not what we're here on this show to talk about, though. We're here to talk about fighting techniques, how the fights played out, the strategies, the fighters themselves, blah, blah, blah. And there is a lot of that kind of stuff to talk about on today's show. I will say, despite all of the weird, corny patriotism stuff, UFC 216 was a pretty special card. I think there was something in the air that night that allowed us to see some really, really spectacular fights. Even the ones that weren't expected to be great were somehow, in new ways, interesting and more compelling than the fight that came before them. It just built up to a head over the course of the card. And I don't know about you, I had a great time watching these fights.
It was so much fun. I think especially the top two fights were just everything I hoped they could possibly be.
When Joe Rogan, after Demetrious Johnson flung Ray Borg in the air and snapped his arm off before he hit the ground, after that, Joe Rogan said, I can't believe we get to watch another fight. And that was how I was feeling. I was so on board with Joe's enthusiasm at that moment because, yeah, I just couldn't believe that after getting to see such a crazy 11th title defense and all the amazing fights before that, then I'd still get to see Tony Ferguson fight. It was just everything I wanted, man. It was such a good card.
Oh my God. I loved everything about this. I like it was a really, 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 really good card. It was the first, I think, really, really, really good card. Not the first really good card, but they have not had a lot of like top to bottom outstanding runs this year.
And there have been recently they've had quite a few cards that were way better than they needed to be. Like the matchmaking has been solid, as we've said, so the fights have generally been pretty damn good this year, but I don't know, something about this one, everything felt a little more momentous. Everything felt a little more memorable, like it was just a lot more relevant for the division. And it was a card, it was special enough that there were two draws, and honestly, I did not see or hear a ton of people complaining about either one, which tells you how amazing both of those fights were. That you have two fights that ended in a draw and everyone's like, yeah, okay, that was great. I'm just happy I got to see it. And that was the experience here. Well, the first fight we're talking about, though, I'll give you guys a quick rundown. Over the course of today's show, we're going to cover Tony Ferguson versus Kevin Lee, the main event. The co-main event, Demetrious Johnson's 11th defense of his flyweight belt against Ray Borg, with a spectacular finish to cap things off. We're going to talk about the lightweight scrap between Beneil Dariush and Evan Dunham, Cody Stamann versus Tom Duquesnoy. That one didn't go the way we expected, and I'm happy to talk about that. Lando Vannata versus Bobby Green, and then we'll just give you some quick mentions for the other things in this card, because yes, there's even more that did pique our interests. But let's start off with the main event. Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee, interim lightweight title fight. Kevin Lee showed up, man. He was not in the best shape. He had the staph infection thing going on, and I do believe, whether you're treating that or not, we saw the same thing. Luke Rockhold always seems to have pretty good stamina, but when he had a staph infection against Chris Weidman, it was probably one of his most lackluster performances in terms of energy level. Kevin Lee fought through it, man. Like he came out, he did the best he could, but eventually, if you're gonna fade, Tony Ferguson's probably the worst guy to fade against.
Yeah, I was really, really, really impressed. Actually, by both guys, but in different ways. I want to let's start with Lee, because I think that was the performance we've been waiting for from Lee.
Yeah.
Like, his talent has always been clear. If you have watched Kevin Lee going all the way back to his very first fights back in 2012, the first time I watched him fight was against a another really highly touted prospect, a guy I liked a lot named Mansour Barnoui, back in like 2013, and Lee had I think it was like his third or fourth pro fight. Maybe he did not have much experience at all.
Wikipedia says it was his second.
He fought Mansour Barnoui. Barnoui is like a battle-tested French prospect. Like, he was like really talented. Now he's kind of like a journeyman, but at that point he was an elite, like high-level kind of prospect.
Yeah, he had his first fight in March of 2012, and he fought Mansour in June of 2012.
That is insane.
Yeah.
That is absolutely insane. And Barnoui, I think at that point had like 6 or 7 pro fights against good opposition on the European scene. Had a ton of amateur fights too. Like, yeah. Anyway, don't want to go into too much depth on that. But I realized watching that fight, that like Lee's physicality was special. His shot was ultra quick. He was a special kind of athlete. And since then, we've all kind of been waiting for him to fulfill his potential. Like, you could see flashes of it, the rear naked chokes, the takedowns, like the sheer strength on his takedowns, his physicality. You could always see that. You could see, like, it looked right when he threw a strike, but he was trying to figure out when was the right time to throw strikes and how rhythm worked and kind of how those pieces work. It seemed to me like he had all that here. Like, all of those pieces, especially with his striking, were falling into place, and it made his wrestling and grappling that much more effective.
Yeah, his counters in particular on the feet were really good. The first round in particular, he landed some excellent counter hooks as Ferguson was coming in. And I think we can talk more about what that says about Tony Ferguson in a bit, but Lee finally seemed to have an opponent's timing on the feet. Like, he was not... The jab started messing him up, as a good jab always should, but he was timing Ferguson before Ferguson found that jab with pretty good consistency, and not getting caught with the shots he was countering either. Like, his positioning, his balance, everything was much more attuned to the actual rhythm of the exchange he was in.
His sense of the distance too, that was a big thing that stood out to me. Before Ferguson kind of took over and did a really good job of disrupting Lee's range. Before then, Lee was much closer. He was comfortable standing much closer than he has been in past fights. Like, we've seen him come up short a lot in the past. Especially he throws a really lovely looking right hand, right? Like a really lovely looking straight right. But like, it was when he fought Francisco Trinaldo, he came up short over and over and over and over again with that shot. And when he would try to throw right kicks in that fight, a lot of them fell short. Like, he was very rarely landing like shin, even when Trinaldo was blocking. It was a lot of foot. In this fight, right from the get-go, it seemed like he was way more comfortable getting to exactly the right range. Like he felt and saw the distance much better with Ferguson, if Lee, who's a pretty meat and potatoes but exceptionally physically gifted fighter, if he starts to get more of an understanding of those intangibles of things like distance and timing and rhythm in combination with his physicality, like, he is going to be a really, really, really tough out for anybody in this division. Like, he's growing into his physical tools.
Yeah, I mean, we talked last week about the interplay between his right hand and his right high kick, like the little things in his game that have always worked well. But when he dropped Tony Ferguson in the first rounds, didn't really hurt Tony, although he did mess up his eye with the punch. But he dropped him with a right hook, and then followed up immediately with the right high kick. Like, he sensed that Ferguson was going down and very nearly caught him on the face as he was falling. And that's the kind of stuff I don't think Kevin Lee was doing before, was capable of doing. Because, like, as we said, he was always like surprised at what was happening. He didn't seem that he was ever in the flow of the striking exchanges, and he really was here.
He was, yeah. That was the thing that stood out so much to me, was that he was reacting. He wasn't he wasn't thinking, he was reacting.
The reactions finally looked like they were set. They were built in, and now he could just use them.
Exactly. Like, I was really impressed. And I mean, but the other thing that really stood out to me is I think that we have all collectively underestimated how fucking good he is on top.
Oh,
because remember when Dos Anjos briefly got Ferguson down? He couldn't hold him down, couldn't get anything going on top, and Ferguson immediately scrambled up. Rafael Dos Anjos is like a gold standard for a top control guy, especially at 155.
Yeah.
And Lee had nowhere near as much trouble with Ferguson. Like, obviously he eventually got submitted, but I think that was a lot more about his exhaustion, about him not having any energy left, and just the kind of constant pressure of Ferguson off his back. more than it was like some skill deficiency. I think from a skill perspective, Lee is second, I guess, only to Khabib, probably as a top control guy in this division.
Yeah, I was after the first round. I think I may have even tweeted this. I was like, if Lee can establish top position again, like if he can beat the scramble, I mean, he did crazy things that did show strength as well as skill. Like when Ferguson was trying to funk his way out of being caught on bottom, Lee kept him down with one underhook. Even when he was not in a mechanically good position, like that
is freakish mutant strength.
Yes, like, he was like rolled over onto his own hands and knees, and he was being wizard and just put Tony Ferguson flat in his back with an underhook, and got into his guard, which was pretty impressive, especially knowing the skill of Ferguson's scrambling ability. But I said, like, if he can establish top position again, Ferguson might not survive the fight because he was very close to being stopped. He was really crafty in how he survived, but he was in serious trouble when Lee was on top of him at the end, and Lee was just too physically strong, and his base is just so good. He has this ability that a lot of great grapplers have to kind of float from position to position, but when he wants to hold a position down, when he wants to use head pressure, when he wants to, keep your elbows or your shoulders pinned to the mat so he can punch you, like he does it really, really consistently well.
Well, I think it's part of an evolution that I think we're seeing in the metagame right now. Is for a long time there was a lot of emphasis on scrambling. There was probably a 5-year period where we saw kind of traditional top control not disappear, but it became a much rarer thing between, say, 2012 and like this year. At a high level, you did not see a lot of I'm going to take you down and grind you out from the top, because guys got really good at not letting their momentum stop. When they got taken down in the first place, guys did a much better job of using the fence to stand back up. There are a lot of components that go into this. A lot better use of the front headlock. You could name like a half dozen things that all contributed to this trend where where grappling exchanges got much faster. There was not as much kind of traditional top control. The basic jiu-jitsu sequence it's still there. It's always going to be there, but it was not nearly as important in the metagame.
Yeah.
Now I think we're seeing it again because guys like Lee and Nurmagomedov and Demetrious Johnson too, something we'll talk about in the next segment, like have gotten so good at sussing out what are the points where a scramble can happen and shutting it down 2 or 3 steps before you ever get to that point, or baiting the scramble and then using it to reestablish even stronger control.
And I think we're seeing now that like people are getting so much more comfortable with their striking on the whole, like I think we're seeing sort of a comeback of the takedown artist as a really viable fighting style as well. Because even if Lee had not been able to hang with Ferguson on the feet, based on what he did on the ground, like timing a good takedown as Ferguson came in totally changed the complexion of that first round. And we've seen some other examples of that. Like MMA wrestling is basically, at least the shot, is all about timing. I know timing is incredibly important in wrestling as well, but the stance is very different, the positioning is different, the threats are different, so it's really all about being able to time somebody. And after that, I do think like shot technique is comparatively less important in MMA than it is in wrestling because the mechanics are different. But we saw a couple of really well-timed takedowns tonight that this has been standing out for me for a while. But in addition to the Luke Sanders, Khabib, and now the Kevin Lee style of grinding, punishing top control, we're also seeing much more consistent attempts to get the fight to the ground, where it does kind of feel to me like the past couple of years, everyone's just kind of been happy to stand. Like that's obviously a very broad statement, but.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with pace, frankly. Like we saw kind of a pace revolution in striking, right? Like where we've seen guys just working way faster, throwing more volume. And there are a couple of components to that. One is just straight up cardio. Like I think fighters are better conditioned now than they were a few years ago. But the other component to that is distance and footwork. That you have to be, if you want to throw a high volume, you need to be closer to your opponent. You need to be willing to stand in closer range if you're going to land volume. Both of those things also apply to takedowns. Right? Like it takes a tremendous amount of energy to shoot a proper takedown and to execute a takedown. Like that is an exhausting thing to do. So pure conditioning, having more energy to burn is going to lead to more takedown attempts and more completions, but also better footwork, better pressure, having a better understanding of where the fence is, or having a better understanding of when to shoot, when you're close enough, how to find angles from which to shoot. Like, all of that stuff applies equally. This is MMA as a whole. Like, you know, I don't want to revisit this too much with like something that we talked about a lot with like Robin Black and Disruption, but like, revolutions and disruptions do not have to be like big flashy things for them to be totally revolutionary.
Yeah.
And the revolution in MMA right now is really in things like fundamental footwork, distance and spacing, and work rate. Like, those are really revolutions. If you think that fighters are generating twice as much offense now as they were 4 or 5 years ago, they're doing twice as many things in a fight. And looking at the underlying reasons why guys can do that, that is a huge revolution in what this sport actually is. And what it means to watch it as a viewer. Like, it is a much different thing now.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Let's talk about Tony Ferguson, though. We've given...
Yes, let's talk about Ferguson.
Okay, so I came to this sort of realization while watching the fight. Like, the stuff I think I was sort of struggling to explain about why I found Tony Ferguson's style so captivating last week. I think I kind of hit upon one of the keys to why his fights play out the way they do. I think, like, I touched on this last week. I said he's like a funk fighter, right? It's not just the funk wrestling. Everything's kind of funk. And you can see that, right? Everything's weird. Everything is very sort of going with the flow of the fight. It doesn't seem like Tony Ferguson, other than just pushing a pace, usually has any very clear designs for like what specific tactics he wants to use against his opponent. He just wants to fight them and see what's open. And I realized watching this that basically everything for Ferguson seems to be based on feel. He has to touch you. I would not be actually surprised to learn that Tony Ferguson had some bad eyesight, because I know that this is the case with me, and my eyes kind of suck, and I know other people who have bad eyesight have gone through this as well. Sam Langford, back during his career, couldn't see that clearly, and had to touch people to know where they were to avoid their shots. Now, I can't say whether Ferguson has that, but I can say that his defense is basically dog shit before he gets his jab working. He's kind of remarkably hittable, in fact, and until he can measure the distance with that jab. But once he starts touching his opponent consistently with that jab, he's Tony Ferguson. He's brilliant, and the combinations start flowing, and his defense comes together because now he knows where his opponent is. And there was a clear shift in this fight in the second round when Ferguson started snapping off that quick up jab, working his left hook off of it, taking angles off of it, that Kevin Lee started to fall apart.
Yeah, so okay, this is we after our love fest for Tony Ferguson last week. It may sound kind of strange for me to say this, but I want to get this out of the way first. I did not think Ferguson looked like the guy who fought Rafael dos Anjos a year ago in this fight. Yeah. I thought he was noticeably slower. I thought his hands, like his feet, have never been incredibly fast, frankly. But I thought his feet looked slower, and I thought more than that, it was noticeable that his hands looked slower. Like, I did not think his combinations had the same kind of snap and quickness to them that they did when he fought Dos Anjos. I don't know what that means. I'm not saying that this was a bad fight. I'm not saying that this is a permanent thing. I'm not saying that Ferguson is shot or over the hill or anything like that.
It may have been a better fight because Ferguson didn't look quite at his best.
Yeah, like, and he may have had some sort of slight injury. There are a lot of explanations for this that are not necessarily part of a larger narrative.
It's entirely possible he snapped his spine doing deadlifts.
If you've seen the tape of Tony Ferguson doing deadlifts, my God, you have never seen a back rounder than that.
How has he not injured himself already?
I'm pretty sure Luke Thomas had an aneurysm when he saw it. It is horrifying. It's not good.
It had to have been featured in one of those Elge Intensity compilations on YouTube, right?
Sage Northcutt made it into an Elge Intensity compilation at one point.
Nice.
For doing curls in a squat rack.
Oh, perfect.
So take that as you will.
A classic.
But Ferguson, I thought that and this comes back to the defense thing. I thought he just looked a little off in this fight. That doesn't mean he's going to look off next time. It doesn't mean that this is the start of some downward slide or anything like that. I just thought he did not look quite as sharp as he did against Dos Anjos, or as he had once he got going against Lando Vannata in the fight before. Like, he just looked just a shade slower. But with that said, his feel, I thought, was almost as good. But also his pace was a little off. He did not end up pushing anywhere close to the pace that he had in prior fights. I don't know if he was worried about the takedown. I don't know if I don't know if he was kind of worried about Kevin Lee's power after having eaten it a little bit.
Tony Ferguson is also like legitimately a weird, crazy dude. Like, he strikes me as a guy whose personality came together because he grew up watching like Tito Ortiz and Frank Mir. So it would not actually shock me if he legitimately was trying to do what he said he would do and stretch out the punishment. If he was like, I'm going to start slow and let this fight play out so I can beat him up some, like, I would not be shocked. Tony Ferguson is the guy who would actually do that kind of shit in a fight, who would carry somebody to get back at them for talking shit at him. It didn't work out exactly as he planned, I have to imagine, which is probably why he didn't actually go to the 5th round like he said he would and had to get Kevin Lee out of there in the 3rd, because the fight was pretty difficult. But I will say, like, I agree with you. I think something looked off. But it all did come together in the 2nd round. At least he approached what he was like in some of his best performances in the past after the 1st round. And I think really we may have just underestimated how much of a slow starter Tony Ferguson is.
Entirely possible. Yeah.
He does a lot to cover that up. I mean, like in the Edson Barboza fight, coming out crazy aggressive, the Lando Vannata fight. But we've seen quite a few fights now where he kind of gets fucked up in the 1st round. Vannata, Barboza hit him with a lot of clean shots. Josh Thompson had a good 1st round against him.
Dos Anjos hit him with a lot in the 1st round. Dos Anjos very clearly won that 1st round.
Yeah, he tends to get going. And I think it's because the same sort of mechanism that drives his excellent funk wrestling drives his striking. I think he has to be feeling his opponent regularly and consistently, knowing exactly where they stand by touching them so that he can react to their movements. Because, like, there was a moment where early on Ferguson went for his jab and got countered hard. But then after he got back up from the knockdown near the end of the 1st round, he came in and he was a little too close. I'm trying to describe something very visual, but Kevin Lee stepped in with his own jab and Ferguson parried it. And as soon as he parried that jab, he knew he was close enough to get his jab back, so he snapped it off, but it didn't get full extension because Lee was coming in to follow his jab with a right hand. And so Ferguson felt that he was closer when his jab connected at like half extension, pulled back very quickly, evaded the right hand, and then hit Kevin Lee with another jab. And that's a very feel kind of thing to do. That's like an educated left hand thing. It speaks of boxing experience. And I think without those exchanges, Tony Ferguson is just kind of like half the fighter he's capable of being.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think he needs a dance partner if you're gonna if you're gonna tango with him. He needs somebody who is willing to fight with him.
Yeah,
and Barboza, and part of the reason that I think you're right about the Barboza fight, the 1st round of that fight, his aggression kind of covering up, because Barboza didn't want to fight with him. And Ferguson was having to throw and throw and throw, but he didn't land very much in the 1st round of that fight. He only really started to land in the 2nd round. So I think you're absolutely right, but I think that's because Ferguson needs you to be giving him information, and Lee did not give him a lot of information in the 1st round.
Yeah, he wants to like fence with you, and I think another reason Lee may have messed him up is that Lee was going for a lot of same time counters. You know, he wasn't like, I'll evade your jab, I'll come back with my jab. Like, it wasn't this sort of in and out boxing interplay that Ferguson likes to mess with. It was like Ferguson would step in to get his range, and Lee would hit him at the exact same time.
Yeah, exactly.
That stuff messed him up.
Stuff that played to Lee's advantage in speed and athleticism.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Which, like, I think Lee had exactly the right plan for this fight. Like, that's a really kind of outstanding thing here is that, and this is actually in kind of an interesting way, maybe a reaction to the kind of pace stuff that we're seeing so much. Like for a long time, everything was faster pace. Now fighters are finding ways to keep the pace down.
Yeah, well, in this fight, same time counters, lateral movement, and reactive takedowns, we saw a very similar approach from another Robert Follis fighter in Evan Dunham against Beneil Dariush. Both guys fought someone they expected to be very aggressive and come forward, and both made some really good work out of trying to counter that guy hard as he came in, either with punches and takedowns, and otherwise making him chase you for the rest of the fight. And that, yeah, it works. Like that's a good response to have powerful counters to an aggressive fighter. It makes absolute sense. So yeah, there was a lot of little fun metagame stuff in these fights. The tactics going back and forth were pretty fascinating, but we'll wrap up the discussion right there. We actually went over our predicted 15 minutes by quite a bit, so we'll come back in segment 2. After this, we're going to talk about Demetrious Johnson versus Ray Borg, and then the rest of UFC 216.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
And we are back. Welcome back to Heavy Hands. Demetrious Johnson defended his flyweight belt for the 11th time, topping Anderson Silva's 10 defense record, consecutive defenses, that is. He took on Ray Borg, and Ray Borg didn't. I mean, he tried his damnedest, but he didn't even really trouble Johnson in the way that I thought he might. Demetrious Johnson was just flawless. I mean, exactly how he looked in the Wilson-Hayes fight. He looked flawless.
Otherworldly.
Yeah, I mean, it was insane. He had so many good. He knew that Borg was going to come and try and surprise him with that speed. He decided to stay at kicking range instead of engaging much with the boxing. His left body kick was vicious. I mean, the best we've ever seen that strike thrown from Demetrious Johnson. And that's the crazy thing. He seems to come into every fight not just as good as he was before, but with like one specific new thing he's added to his game. And I don't know how he does it. Like, he's always just adding it's like a tactical choice he makes specific for his next opponent, and it really comes through. And maybe that's just a testament to how well Demetrious Johnson fights to a game plan, or how well he understands what will work against his opponent. But something told him the left body kick would be there, and it was there over and over and over again early on in this fight.
So my theory here, and this has been my theory for Demetrious Johnson for a long time, is that he doesn't actually have preferences. He doesn't have things that he likes to do. He doesn't have tendencies. He doesn't. Everything that he does is a tool that serves an end, a tactical or strategic end. And he threw left body kicks, not because he liked throwing the left body kick, but because he wanted to be at kicking range and he wanted to attack Borg's body, and that was it.
Yep.
And it wasn't like he was throwing left body kicks and he thought, in camp, and he thought, this feels really good. I like this. This is a hard shot. It served a very particular purpose for him. But the wild thing, this is just as a baseline thing, Demetrious Johnson, before this, generally a pressure fighter, really liked to get after guys. In his last 2 fights, he's just been like the best out fighter at 145 pounds because he decided he wanted to be an out fighter.
He's just been cutting angles, peppering people with shots, getting in on clinch attempts, and then he's been all the way in, all the way out, which it seems to be, I guess, the new evolution of his known sort of weakness for pocket boxing. But it makes it so that it's not a problem at all. Like, he glides in and out of those ranges so smoothly. And yeah, I think you're right. Obviously, there are some things he prefers that are not necessarily, like, I don't know. He said that he did that suplex to armbar in the gym all the time, which is not something that I think was like, this is the exact, although maybe you're right. Like, it was just the right move in that moment. He knew he could hit it, and he was like, well, this move's here, so he went.
Well, because think about it, instead of thinking about it from the perspective of the move, think about it from the perspective of the end.
Yeah,
the end was, I have the components that go into that are, I have his back, and I want to try. And there are 3 minutes left or 2.5 minutes left, and I want to finish the fight. What gets me? What gets him? What finishes the fight with 2.5 minutes left, with me starting in this position? It's not, I want to hit a suplex because it looks cool. It's not, I want to go suplex to armbar because I think that's a cool thing. It's, I have this very particular sequence in my head that fits perfectly the strategic and tactical context of this fight at this given moment. That's the insane thing.
Yeah, it's the emotional detachment from the fight is part of what makes Demetrious Johnson so amazing. Like, lots of martial arts people talk about how you have to be cold in a fight. You can't get mixed up in how you're feeling about it. Demetrious Johnson is like one of the few guys I've ever seen who always seems to fight by that philosophy. He never seems mixed up with his emotions. He's just completely thinking about what is the best tactical decision for this moment.
Yeah, it's like you're absolutely right. The emotional detachment is a huge piece of it. It's not that he's an emotionless fighter,
no,
or an emotionless person, though he is pretty fucking even keeled.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a lot to kind of put him off. I mean, so I went to a media lunch with him and Kevin Lee last week, and reporters were asking Johnson the usual kinds of questions about publicity and promotion and shit like that, and he was just giving one-word answers. He didn't want anything to do with it. And then Kevin Lee, on Demetrious Johnson's behalf, launches into a great answer about the importance of promotion and and what the UFC is supposed to do, and so on and so forth. Demetrious Johnson just turns to him, smiles, and he says, "That's my motherfucking publicist right there." And clearly satisfied that somebody had stepped up to give a good answer on his behalf, was happy about this. It's not like he's affectless. He has plenty of affect.
He's very funny. He's very charming. And also he's a little cocky and arrogant now. And I almost feel bad even saying arrogant because it's absolutely earned. And his personality comes through even in his fights. It's just that even the way he talks about the tactics he chooses for each moment, it's just very, very matter of fact. It was just the right move for that moment.
Yep. And this is part of my thought on Demetrious Johnson, why he doesn't get enough, or why he doesn't get as much credit as he should for being literally the best fighter ever in terms of command of MMA, is that there is a barrier to entry for understanding and appreciating him in a way that there isn't for somebody like Anderson Silva or John Jones. Though I think you still need to know something about MMA to actually appreciate John Jones.
Yeah.
In Johnson's case, you have to understand how impossible the things that he's doing are, not just in the moment, but in the context of the fight, because it's perfect. You have to understand that there are wrong ways to do things, and that there are ways in which things can go wrong at various points in the fight, and that they never do for Johnson, not by luck, but because he's just so good.
Yeah, it is. It's watching somebody. It is sort of like watching somebody walk a high wire between two skyscrapers, and just doing it really quickly, like running across the high wire. It's like that for somebody who's, I guess, for the educated fight fan. Not to be all pompous about it, but if you know what you're looking at, I think that's how you feel. You just this isn't supposed to be this easy. This isn't supposed to be this flawless. He's not supposed to take 100 fewer strikes than his opponent over the course of 5 rounds. He's not supposed to finish every single opponent, it seems, in the last minute of the fight because he feels like it. It's not supposed to be that easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's things like I'll give a couple other sports parallels. Like when you see Steph Curry just nail 3-pointers from 35 or 40 feet away just for the fuck of it, that's incredibly difficult to do. Yesterday there was a clip of Jacksonville Jaguars running back Leonard Fournette jumping over the pile from the 4-yard line, right, and just looking effortless as he does this. And there are these things that you don't understand how hard they are to do or how impossible they are until you see other people try to do them. And
right.
But because there is nobody else who can do what Demetrious Johnson does, it's almost like we don't understand the downside of it. Nobody else is capable of being perfect, so nobody really tries the same way that Demetrious Johnson does.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, nobody, there is no parallel for him. There is nobody that we can point to and be well, they tried to do this and they failed to do it. So now we understand the magnitude of Johnson's accomplishment. He's just perfect.
Yeah, it was flawless, man. Credit to Ray Borg. He didn't slow down as much as I expected him to. He wasn't getting beaten up a lot, even if he was absolutely on the losing end of almost every single exchange.
But he was getting beaten up a lot. He took a ton of punishment, especially to the body.
Oh yeah, yeah.
like he didn't slow down. He didn't get broken.
That's what I'm saying. He wasn't in a position where he was just helplessly, like he was trying even as he was absorbing these shots. He was trying to scramble. He was using his advantages, like his physical strength, whenever he could. My God, man, the top control of Demetrious Johnson when Ray Borg was trying to explode back to his feet was just phenomenal. The weight distribution that Demetrious Johnson has when he's in side control on top of somebody is insane. Like nobody even gets to secure side control at flyweight. It rarely even happens because everybody scrambles so quickly, and side control is already not really the preferred control position for MMA fighters because of the different sort of metagame that it's much easier to escape in a certain way than half guard, or it's at least harder to learn to have as tight control there as you do in half guard when you have a leg entanglement going on. Mm-hmm. And Demetrious Johnson just kept Ray Borg on his back flat in side control for like 30% of this fight, at least.
Well, so you could see this. You can see this happen in every Demetrious Johnson fight. That over the course of the first round or so, he figures out something that, like, not his preference, but something that you don't like, right? Whether it could be a range on the feet, it could be a particular kind of movement, it could be a particular kind of pressure, it could be a position in the clinch, it could be a position on the ground. He figures out one thing that you really don't like, and then he builds a flow chart out from there of ways to keep coming back to that thing that you don't like. And what he discovered for Borg was that Borg doesn't like side control. And I think there are a variety of reasons for that. I think it's because in Borg's case, it's not hard to get there. That because of Borg's style, because of his tendency to wrap up your neck whenever he's given an opportunity, that Johnson figured out about halfway through the first round that he could bait the guillotine, that he could bait Borg into grabbing his neck.
I was half convinced he was going to try and Von Flue him. Like, I think he thought about it a couple times.
I'm sure he did.
He was baiting the guillotine so well to pass to side control.
Exactly. So he figured out real early on that side control was going to be a position that he could get to. Once he figured out that he could get there, then he figured out that Borg didn't have a lot of real good options for getting up from there. Borg tried like two different ways of getting up from side control, right? Like he tried a kind of a simple bump and roll, and then he tried grabbing an underhook, and then he tried grabbing an underhook and standing back up. And those were the two ways that Borg knew how to get out of side control, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like they're very straightforward kind of jiu-jitsu 101 ways of standing up from that position. In large part, you're right, because we don't see it that much. We don't see a lot of side control.
Right, yeah. And they're very much reliant on his physical strength, which is like probably the one advantage you don't want to have to rely on against Demetrious Johnson. Not that there aren't people in this division who are much stronger than him, although actually I think he is much stronger than he seems.
Dude, when you stand next to him, like, he is thick. Like, and kind of wire.
You can see in his fights. I always say you look at him fighting, his back looks like an aircraft carrier. Like, he's very broad and strong, despite being like the smallest dude in the division in terms of stature.
Like, I mean, I outweigh him by 100 pounds, but like when I stand next to Demetrious Johnson, I don't think this is a puny guy.
Yeah,
that's not necessarily the way you feel with every fighter. I thought Michelle Watterson, when I saw her, did not look strong. You know, she did not look strong. Paige Van Zandt is not imposing physically. Joanna Jędrzejczyk actually is. She is not. When you see her, you do not think like this is. You can see kind of the wiriness that she has.
Yeah.
God, who are some other ones? I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
All the ones that Pat is not intimidated by are women. I just want to point that out and apologize to our three female listeners.
That's what I'm trying to think of as an example of a male fighter who doesn't like look that. Yeah. Who doesn't kind of have that same kind of imposing look to him.
Chris Camozzi.
Donald Cerrone.
Okay.
You don't look at him and think like this is a physically strong guy. He just doesn't have that kind of he doesn't give off that same kind of impression of physicality. Weirdly enough, Andrei Arlovsky does not when you stand next to him really seem to me like, oh yeah, this dude looks that strong relative to other heavyweights. I'm trying to think. Fabricio does. Like, you stand next to Fabricio and you're like, oh yeah, this dude kind of has the look. I don't know. Not that the eye test is always a good one, because John Jones also does not look that physically imposing.
True, that's true. Yeah, and he really is. Mm-hmm. Well, we now have a short list of all the fighters Pat Wyman thinks he could beat. All the ones he thinks are too pussy to take him on. So all of those fighters, if you're listening to this show, and I know you are, you know how to get in touch with him. Hit Pat up, and we can arrange this.
No, I think I could out deadlift Donald Cerrone. That's what I'm saying.
You could certainly out deadlift Tony Ferguson, but only in terms of form.
I know I could deadlift more than Tony Ferguson.
Okay. All right. Well, let's not get...
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, probably.
It would kill my back for about a week afterwards, but I could do it.
I mean, it kills Tony Ferguson's back, too. So.
Well, it should if he doesn't have rubber. If he doesn't have rubber. But, okay, so, like, grand scheme of things here, what do you think is next for Demetrious Johnson? Who do you want to see him fight? What do you think that next fight looks like?
I think the winner of Cejudo Pettis is perfect. Is exactly the fight that he needs right now.
Do you want to see him fight Cody Garbrandt or TJ Dillashaw or somebody like that?
I was so excited at the prospect of him fighting TJ Dillashaw. I would love to see that. I understood his reservations about it when I learned more about why he didn't want that fight, or why he had conditions around the fight that I thought were pretty reasonable, but more than reasonable, in fact. But I would still love to see that fight if it were able to be made. So
I think Garbrandt is the only dude in either division at this point that I would pick over him.
Yeah.
After giving it quite a bit of thought, because I used to think like Dillashaw could pressure him or could outfight, could do something on the feet and push a pace and make it work. But now I don't think that Dillashaw could compete with DJ in like wrestling and grappling exchanges. Like I really think DJ could could work him in the clinch, could pressure him, could shut down Dillashaw's scrambles.
And the thing is, this is the one other thing I wanted to say when you were talking about the side control, and then it slipped my mind. We were talking about, you deadlifting, out deadlifting Tony Ferguson. I got distracted.
I understand.
I was just imagining, the incredible display of strength. And the thing is, Demetrious Johnson always finds a way to pressure you, even when he is doing the outfighting thing on the feet. And it really came through in the side control in this fight, when he's just always fiddling with something when he's on top of you. Like he's always working on your arm or setting you up for it. Like there's always a threat, and then the threat that comes after you've defended that threat. These are like automatic things for him. Meanwhile, he's thinking, how can I advance position? In what way is he going to explode? How is he going to move next? But meanwhile, he's just keeping them busy with these threats of attacks that people know he's good at. Like people know Demetrious Johnson's dangerous with the Kimura grip. People know he's dangerous from side control in general. And so people have to respond to these threats. And I think that was a really big problem for Borg, is that he ended up being stuck in position, not just because Demetrious Johnson is strong, not just because he has great side control, but because he was always defending. He didn't have enough time to think about different strategies to escape those positions. And that's the kind of stuff that I think would also come through in a fight with TJ Dillashaw. Like, as remarkable as Dillashaw's wrestling and scrambling really is, Demetrious Johnson has a way of turning great scramblers into sort of flat grapplers by constantly threatening them and always having another avenue of attack in his back pocket if they react in a way that like when they finally react in the way he's been waiting for. Like when he stepped over into mount against Borg after Borg tried to bump and roll out of side control, he was waiting for it. You could see it was right there. As soon as Borg exploded, Demetrious Johnson was in mount. And in the meantime, he was just fucking with Borg's right arm, waiting for him to do it.
I mean, I feel like for a fighter like Johnson, a lot of opponents think that they can kind of overload him with information, that you just give the computer too much information to process, right? And the more I think about it with him, and I think Dillashaw would try to do that. I think Dillashaw would try to kind of overwhelm him with volume and pace on the feet. I think he would try to overwhelm him with takedown attempts, try to out physical him, really try to kind of do what Dominic Cruz did years ago when they fought, right?
Yeah.
But a kind of a more refined version of that. The more I think about it, the more I don't think that'd work these days. I think that Dillashaw is not so much bigger that his physical that his size would automatically give that to him, and I think that the information that he's giving Johnson at this point would actually play against him, because I don't think that there is a fighter alive who can think with Demetrious Johnson, who can absorb and play with information the way that he can, who can build those flowcharts in real time. Like I think it would go to a decision. I think it would be a competitive fight. I think Dillashaw would win rounds, but I think at the end of the day, when you give Demetrious Johnson that much information and that much to work with, there's just you're playing into him. Where that's why I think Garbrandt would be harder, is because Garbrandt doesn't give you that much information.
You pick his spots a lot more, but he's also a lot more dangerous in those spots.
Exactly. He picks his spots. He's more dangerous in those spots. He has that tight fundamental footwork that he doesn't have to do that much in order to win rounds, in order to hurt you. Like I think Garbrandt is maybe the only guy that I would pick over DJ. I think even at this point, Cruz could maybe just out physical DJ again because he's so big, because he's like 160 pounds. He outweighs him by like 20 pounds, 25 pounds. So that's a huge advantage. But even there, I'm not sure I would pick Cruz straight up.
It's not like the last fight was a blowout, and Demetrious Johnson, I mean, both guys are better than they were, but if you're looking at who is dramatically improved since that fight, it's Demetrious Johnson more than it is Cruz.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Demetrious Johnson continues to baffle the mind and amaze the senses. And I honestly, like, after things like this, I am left to wonder why some people just can't appreciate what he does. And I guess, like, a certain benchmark is, I think you just need to watch a lot of fights. You need to have a great, vast context to understand why what he's doing is so impressive. But, you know, like, if your other reasons are like, oh, he's too small or whatever, like, if you, like Pat, think you could beat up Demetrious Johnson, unlike Pat, actually, Demetrious
Johnson would kick the shit out of me. Absolutely murder me.
It would be like those dog shit lightsaber fights in the prequels, the Star Wars prequels, with Yoda, like, flipping around. Like, I'd just be this big, slow, lumbering, fat ass. Demetrious Johnson would just like hop onto my neck and... Yeah,
I'm an overfed zoo gorilla. Like that would be it would look like Yoda fighting an overfed zoo gorilla. Oh. Like that's, you know, the one that just sits there with like his belly sticking out, like, but could still very obviously like break the glass if he really wanted to. I feel like that's me in this metaphor here.
That's you. Like, so Pat also thinks he could out deadlift Harambe. Rip in peace, Harambe. Very disrespectful of you, Pat, but that's enough for this segment. We'll wrap it up here. When we come back, we're going to basically talk about the rest of this card. We've got to give a little shine to John Moraga's big upset knockout win over Magomed Bibulatov. I want to talk a little bit about Brad Tavares' win on the prelims. I want to talk about Mauro Romero Borella, but most importantly, I want to talk about Lando Vannata versus Bobby Green, and Tom Duquesnoy versus Cody Stamann. There's so much left to cover, and that'll be after this break.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
And welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's go ahead and talk about Lando Vannata's fight with Bobby Green. What a goddamn fight. Just insane, the level of action in this contest. And I do have concerns about Lando Vannata's longevity since so many of his fights seem fit to look like this. But I also came to realization during this fight, and this is maybe not even meaningful or important, but it did help me understand what I think Lando Vannata's problems are and what his strengths are. He is just Conor McGregor with short arms. Like, that is Lando Vannata's style. His power came through and helped him out in this fight at times when he wasn't doing so well. He has defensive moves that precede counters, but they don't really exist in the context of his attacks. They're not systematically ingrained into him at every moment. Offensively, he chains things together beautifully, absolutely beautifully. But defensively, there's something to be desired. And like Conor McGregor, he does not seem to have a great sense of pace and control over the course of an entire fight. He is a lot too willing to leap on basically every opportunity given to him, which to me, that's Conor McGregor without the long arms, which I think is why Lando Vannata is having such a hard time definitively beating these higher level, more experienced opponents, because with basically the same style as Conor McGregor, he is standing much closer than McGregor usually does to his opponents and getting hit a lot more.
Yeah, I'm not sure I necessarily buy the comparison on the whole, but I understand where it's coming from, and I think it hits some important things about Vannata as a fighter. His defense, man, he keeps his head moving right up until the second that he throws, right up until the second where he's in range to be hit. It's Rashad Evans syndrome from back in the day.
It's not quite. Like, this is why I compare it to McGregor, because McGregor's defense is good in the right circumstances. But as we've said about him, like, the defense, it's not there when it's there when he's preparing to counter or when he's waiting for an attack. He has the right moves. But the moves don't flow off of the defense flows into his offense and not the other way around. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's why we keep criticizing Vannata for watching his work, because, and I think it's like, this is the other realization that is probably a lot more meaningful than a vague Conor McGregor comparison. But he's not just watching his work, he's watching for more work. He doesn't ever seem to be thinking after he lands his first counterpunch or whatever, what's coming back at me? How do I get away? Instead, he's thinking, and he's not like weighing the risk all that much. He's thinking, what's the next punch I can land? Like, what's open now that I've made that connection? And so when he gets rolling, like when he had Bobby Green hurt, his combinations were amazing to watch. They were really beautiful, like working the body to the head, left hooks, pumping the jab to keep Green's eyes occupied in between while he was resetting for his next shot. Like, the punches and the Dutch combinations to counter Bobby Green's shoulder rolling, like ending with the low kicks to punish him as he turned. Like, when the strikes flow together, it's beautiful. But when Bobby Green planted his feet and threw back, Vannata got hit like 60% of the time.
Yeah, so I actually thought that Vannata won this fight. I thought that he took the second round. I didn't think that it should have been a draw, and I feel that way more after watching it again. Like, I really thought that this was thought this was Vannata's
I thought
fight.
Bobby Green. There would have been a very strong argument for Bobby Green earning that draw if he hadn't gotten hurt in the second round, because just on the strikes landed up to the point where he was rattled, he was actually competing quite well.
And then in the third, you mean, like right at the end of the fight?
No, in the second, Bobby Green got hurt.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you were talking about Vannata getting hurt.
He had Vannata against the fence. He was trying to clinch and dirty box, and Vannata hit him with like a sort of overhand right, and it completely turned his knees to water. And I thought that was when I was like, all right, well, it was close up to this point. Now it's Vannata's round.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't disagree. I really think that. This to me is one of those fights where, like, you get why it's a draw in the moment, but I thought that Vannata just landed the way better shots for most of the fight. And in hindsight, when you're not caught up quite as much in that, I thought it was more clearly his fight. He's a really talented guy. I hope he's making himself a lot of bonus money. Mm-hmm. I just hope at some point, like, he gets to blossom a little more, because you keep getting in wars like this, and maybe. Like, it takes some years off of
and maybe you get stuck being an action fighter rather than, like, being more than an action fighter, being a championship contender. Yeah. But even though, while I agree, I don't think that Bobby Green won the second round. I thought that Vannata probably should have gotten, what would that have been then? A 28-27 decision.
Yes. That was what I thought it should have been.
Yeah. And that sounds about right to me as well. I think that's probably the right call. But I will say, Bobby Green showed up, man. He really showed up to give Vannata some work. His jab was beautiful. His counter right hands, that was a big thing here. Like, the little short timing shots, Bobby Green had the advantage in that category. There were a few occasions where Vannata would be like lining up for an elbow in the clinch. He would look at his target. He'd say, okay, now's the moment. I'm going to throw the elbow. And as soon as he did it, Green would just, without falling forward, without giving his head as a target, just turn his shoulders and let Vannata duck his head into a right hand and not eat the elbow. Like, that kind of stuff was really impressive. And Vannata had trouble with that. The little sneaky, crafty shit that Bobby Green was doing gave him some serious pause, I think.
Yeah, it was as good a performance as we've seen from Bobby Green since he fought Josh Thompson.
For sure.
Which was a brilliant performance from Bobby Green. Mm-hmm. And Bobby Green has brilliant performances in him. He is a really good fighter with a lot of depth of skill and a lot of different things that he knows how to do.
And a ton of experience.
Ton of experience against really good fighters, too.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, Bobby Green showed up, man. But Vannata did... Yeah, he had those problems. I don't know, like the chaining of offense is something he does so well. Is there like how does somebody figure out how to work defense back into their style? I don't know. Like, some of it I think might just be mental. I think, honestly, that Vannata has a new strength and conditioning coach. That's awesome. Yes, he looked a little fresher, but it's kind of like McGregor thinking, not to keep making McGregor comparisons, but it's like McGregor thinking he needs to work on his cardio really hard after the Nate Diaz fight and then still gets really tired in the second one. Like, I don't think cardio is the big problem with Lando Vannata. I think it's a matter of control.
Yeah, and that's what, when I asked Lando Vannata and Greg Jackson about this, and Brandon Gibson about this after he fought Tony Ferguson, and all of them said that it was about rhythm. That there's nothing. Vannata is as conditioned as anybody at Jackson Wink. He does all the work. It's not like he's slacking off.
Yeah.
It's not like he's lacking something in that department. It's that he gets really excited.
Yeah.
And
discipline
he doesn't
is lacking.
Yeah, like you can up your output without losing control of yourself. Mm-hmm. And but when Vannata gets excited and he ups his output, he throws more into shots. And you can see when he's flowing versus when he's forcing it. You can see that really clearly with him.
Yeah, and that was like Bobby Green was flowing early in this fight. That was what was giving Vannata trouble. But when Vannata was on, like there was one moment he hit Green with a wide right to the body and then a left hook. And Green was like he was hiding behind his shoulder. He was trying to scoot out of range, and to keep him from resetting or eyeing up a counter, Vannata just touched him like 6 times in quick succession with his jab. He wasn't throwing the jab. He was just, like sort of like knocking on a door on Bobby Green's face just to keep him occupied and to keep the sense of how close is Bobby Green? Is he getting farther away? I want to give him something to look at. Like, it was very flow. And that's the kind of stuff that looks so great when Vannata does it. And after he hurt Green in the second and was pouring on the combinations, beautiful stuff, and a lot more efficient. But when it's the big explosive counters, when it's like, I'm going to slip and counter with the right hand, not only is that when he's clearly putting the most energy into it, his strikes, it's also when he's the most counterable. He kind of makes it a little more obvious or makes it harder for him to recover and then flow into more offense or, hopefully in the future into defense after that big attack.
Yeah, I'm with all that. So, Tom Duquesnoy, man, what happened?
Well, I'm gonna double down on what I said after Tom Duquesnoy's last fight. I think he needs to either learn to avoid the pocket or he needs to probably more likely, he needs to learn to bridge it better. Because I thought he had some good ideas in this fight. He was clearly a lot harder to catch clean. He was a lot more evasive. But, as I said last week, as I said about Thomas Almeida, he wasn't setting up his pressure. He wasn't setting up his entries into the clinch, which is where he does a lot of his most effective work. Like, Tom Duquesnoy was either fighting from the outside or he's being aggressive. And the two don't seem to enforce each other in any way. They don't augment each other in any way. And so he was, by the end of this fight, I think he was kind of lost for ideas because he was not sure how to take a different route into the pocket, and he wasn't really landing that many effective strikes from the outside. So he was kind of stuck. And Cody Stamann, once again, showed off good ring IQ and just stayed as much as he could in the center of the cage. He pressured when he was able in order to keep himself away from the fence. His takedowns, the timing on them, again, timing is probably more important than technique. We criticized his technique a bit last week. It's still not flawless, but the timing on his
insane drive.
Yes.
Insane drive.
The timing on his shots, his physical strength is crazy. And even if he doesn't get to hold Tom Duquesnoy down for very long, once again, Cody Stamann looked like a very put together fighter.
Yeah. He's extremely polished.
Yes.
Like, he's ready to compete with guys on the fringes of the top 15.
For sure.
Like, he kind of reminds me of Jimmy Rivera.
Sure. Yeah. That is not a bad shout.
Way. Like a less dangerous Jimmy Rivera, or an earlier career Jimmy Rivera.
But probably with a better shot.
Yeah, I would say so.
I mean, Jimmy's a good wrestler, but Cody Stamann's shot is something to be considered.
Yeah, I thought you hit the nail on the head with Duquesnoy running out of ideas here. It's like he got this idea into his head before this fight that he needed to not get hit as much. He needed to be more sound. He needed to be more technical, kind of.
More technical. We love that. We love that thought process. More technical means don't be aggressive, don't fight on the inside.
Yeah. And I think he kind of got in his head about that, and he decided he was going to pick him off with kicks and single shots, and he was going to be technical, and then he was going to dive into the clinch at the end. But his entries weren't that good. His control wasn't that good. He didn't throw enough. He didn't have a lot of answers for Stamann to adjust to. And that's kind of the puzzling thing to me is like one of the really outstanding things about Duquesnoy early in his career was how he mixed things up. Like he would go from punches to kicks to the clinch to shots to like he transitioned really easily from phase to phase. Like he was a great phase shifter. Mm-hmm. And now he basically hasn't shot a takedown in like 5 fights. He's become pretty much exclusively a range striker and clinch fighter.
Yeah.
And he's pretty good at that, and he's pretty dangerous, and like his pace and his power and his killer instinct and all of that is good, or has been good. But like he was kind of a better fighter earlier. I don't know. Like he's way more linear than he used to be. He used to be way more circular. He used to like cut angles and move a lot more as well. I don't know. Like I don't want to. And again, obviously that was against lower level opposition. So maybe against higher level opposition, he doesn't think he can do that, or this is just kind of the way he's evolving. But like, as a matter of his future, I think he kind of needs to get back to his roots and mix shit up.
Yeah, I mean, I think he did have some of the right ideas in the early going here. Like he didn't want to get hit as much, but he was like pumping a pawing jab, which was the thing. I did that my MMA Garage piece or after his UFC debut, and I said he needs a pawing jab. Like that is the one thing I could think of that would instantly help Tom Duquesnoy to accomplish what I imagined his goal was of bridging the gap from the outside to the clinch, getting into the pocket and then getting out, like hiding his strikes and not getting stuck in a range where, like you are necessarily more hittable. Because if you're going to stand close to your opponent, if you're going to stand right on the edge of range, you're going to be hittable. He tried it early on, but he just didn't like. As soon as Cody Stamann decided to sort of bear down, he took him down, and then he was throwing. Cody Stamann, as we said last week too, has a very good left hook. It's very tight and very crisp and quick. And he was using those kinds of little short counters and the takedowns to ward Duquesnoy off. And then he kind of got away from the pawing jab, and then it's like he forgot why he was using it. Like his goal at that point just became, you are not going to get hit as much as you did in your last fight. But it left him in a position where he wasn't sure how to win the rounds. He didn't really have a good safe route inside, and he was no longer as willing to be unsafe to make it happen. That's how it seemed to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the answer is here. He's obviously a really talented guy, but it's pretty. It was kind of weird to see a guy who used to have so many options feel so reduced in options. Mm-hmm. Like it felt very strange to me. Like it was not like it was like watching somebody very different.
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, some credit does have to go to Cody Stamann, but again, it was like where was Duquesnoy's leg kicks, and where were his angles to set up his quick rushes on the inside? And I don't know. It did seem like some things were missing. And maybe it's just, I think we're probably still looking at prospect losses. That's my hope, and that we will see Tom Duquesnoy's game continue to be retooled and honed. But, he's still only, 23, 24?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a young dude. He's got a lot of room to grow still. Like this is not an end of the world loss, and it's not like Stamann is like a scrub fighter. Stamann's really good.
I think so too. And Stamann looked very good against. Matchup. Yeah, he looked very good against Terrion Ware. He looked good in new ways in this fight. He seems to be a fighter who understands how best to fight given the specific opponent in front of him, and that does a hell of a lot for you. Like just having a good strategic approach to each new opponent. Can get you very far when you are also a very good athlete and just a well put together fighter. And credit, by the way, to Darren Cruikshank and crew up at Michigan Top Team, because we gave them like sort of some half praise last week, but you can't really say they haven't done a damn good job with Cody Stamann. He, again, put together, polished is the best way to say it. And you got to give some credit to his team for that.
Yeah.
All right. Good. That's about it for the main fights. Just a couple of other highlights we wanted to shout out before we wrap up. Brad Tavares had the performance of his career over Talis Laitis and the curtain jerker fight pass prelim. He was using a sort of what I would call a trip hammer jab, throwing it very quick and straight, just with the arm, right from his guard, almost kind of dropping down on the target. And Leites was just getting fucked up by that jab. By the end of the fight, his right eye was cut, I think above and below the eye, completely swollen shut. Brad Tavares' jab was a thing of beauty. And he used to set up some pretty vicious low kicks and some really nice counter punches on the breaks and in the pocket as well. So, again, Brad Tavares is still not ever going to be like a amazing action fighter, but this is kind of the performance I think he's been trying to put together for the last several years of his career now. A very controlled, sharp, technical kickboxing win. So I thought that was great. John Moraga over Magomed Bibulatov. You have any words you want to say about that, Pat?
Just that we kind of saw some of the weaknesses in Bibulatov's game, and I'm glad that we shouted out Moraga's chances of exploiting those beforehand.
For our reputation's sake, thank God we pointed out that Bibulatov is not a great pocket boxer.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that there are some weaknesses to this kind of emerging North Caucasus style in general, and like a lack of consistent offense and a kind of a range in the pocket where they don't have a lot to offer, aside from physicality and speed and the threat of that quick shot. There are some holes there, and like, you know, Bibulatov, he's not done as a fighter. He's still a really good prospect, like all the caveats, but like, I do think there's kind of an emerging weakness there, which is part of the reason why I do like Peter Yan, a really talented bantamweight prospect that we've talked a lot about, who fights in ACB. He's the ACB bantamweight champion. I think that's part of the reason why he's had so much success, is because he's fighting dudes. He's a really good boxer and a really good infighter, and he's fighting dudes who are not qualified on that level with him.
Yeah, I mean, like, once John Moraga sort of realized, oh, he's going to throw one thing at me and then I can evade it and come back with 2 or 3 shots in a row, like, that was it. That was the solution. He just needed to avoid the weird pot shot, and there was some unpredictability to be accounted for. But on the feet, he needed to avoid the first shot and then come back with a couple of layers of offense. And he did it. He came back, overhand right, stepped in a little bit of a shift, left hook to follow up, dropped Bibulatov super hard just over a minute into the fight. So, I mean, John Moraga just threw himself into title contention, basically, or at least back up into the conversation to maybe set somebody else up for a title shot, which is probably more likely to be the case. But since John Moraga, so you said before we started the show, you'd always kind of wondered why I liked John Moraga. And it was funny, I think either on Heavy Hands or on the Vivisection last week, I was saying, you know, I haven't seen that really crisp pocket boxing from him since his UFC debut against Ulysses Gomez. He fought Useless Gomez, and he just lit him up with these really nice, efficient, short punches in the pocket. And I was always like, when is that going to come back? And it came back kind of when I least expected it. And I'm not at all unhappy about that. Once again, fuck you, Ramzan Kadyrov. There's always going to be a little bit of a schadenfreude for me watching one of those guys get knocked out. So,
no disagreement.
Mara Romero Barella looked really, really solid on the ground. Phenomenal guard passing. She had an amazing little trick where Kalindra Faria was trying to was in mount and tried to get her feet on the cage so she could try to roll out, and Barella put her own foot on the cage and slid them both away before Faria could use it to get any elevation. That is not something you would expect from a relatively inexperienced fighter, although I guess Barella has a few fights under her belt and is now like a contender in the new women's flyweight division. So good performance there. And we both also wanted to shout out Matt Schnell, who looked good. And we both had pretty high hopes for him in the UFC, and he did not deliver. He had a really hard time both of his first 2 UFC fights. He looked extremely sharp and comfortable for the first time in the UFC against Marco Beltran, not the toughest opponent in the world, but I thought Beltran would win maybe through sheer scrappiness, and Schnell refused to be drawn into a scrap, which is saying a lot for a young fighter. So that's it for this edition of Heavy Hands. Before we wrap up, what do you have coming out this week, Pat?
I have a piece on Deadspin, a post-fight piece talking about Tony Ferguson and the elusive Conor McGregor and how great that fight would be and why we probably won't get to see it. That's doing that. And then I have a new episode of Tides of History coming out on Roman cities. So I think it should be a good, fun episode about how and why cities were central to the Roman world, economic centers, political centers, cultural centers. Should be fun. Think you'll enjoy it.
Nice. Well, the Tony Ferguson piece I was working on last week, it has been retooled. It was even as I was writing it, I was thinking this would be way better if he gets the win I expect him to get. So the piece almost got scrapped because Kevin Lee looked like he was going to win. But the premise still stands, in fact, arguably even stronger, and the working title for that is Tony Ferguson might be the best lightweight in the world, but only after the first round. So I'm going to try to examine sort of the ins and outs of Tony's style, why he has success, and why he gets into trouble. And that's about it. Find us on social media. You want to get in touch, we are both on Twitter. Pat is at Patrick_Wyman, and I am at BoxingBush, BUSCH. You can also find us both on Facebook, facebook.com/PatrickWymanMMA or /Conor Ruebusch MMA. And you should also, check us out on iTunes, reviews, ratings. We should mention that stuff more, I guess, because that's what podcasts are supposed to do. But tell your friends, subscribe to the show, hit us up on Patreon. $3 a month gives you 2 or more bonus episodes every single month, including special features, special interviews, and, little things we don't have enough time to talk about on this show, but which we still really want to talk about. Those happen on the bonus episodes, so give those a look as well. And otherwise, thank you for tuning in. If you came here this week for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.